we are still involved in the esoteric tradition, its relationship to the history and the nation of the United States. I must admit that I have picked that particular topic in part because I knew that this was the lecture fairly soon after the election, and so it may even shed a little bit of light on the varying political situations of this country, which may or may not be true. In any event, this evening I was hoping to review some of the esoteric currents that may have been of importance at the time of the founding of the American Republic and in various degrees thereafter, and their relationship to, really to the main esoteric tradition. Now, let's say, looking at it, even though we are not there, but looking at it in imagination from a sort of Mediterranean and European perspective, we need to keep in mind that for times immemorial there has been a tradition, a rumor, a historical legend that somewhere out beyond the Atlantic Ocean there was a mysterious land. And the various explorers and sailors and missionaries had that in mind and occasionally made attempts to go to that land and to explore it. And now the ancient pre-Christian era of the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans had a legend which spoke of a fairly large island, a large landmass in the Atlantic Ocean, which they called Poseidonis, because Poseidon is the god of the storms and of the ocean, so they connected it with his name, and which later on acquired the legendary name of Atlantis. So that was really about the only mysterious prefiguration of the discovery of the new continent, and eventually to be named, and I never could quite figure out why, he named after an Italian Navy officer, Amerigo Vespucci. And so his name having been Amerigo, somehow the explorers connected his name because of some incident of discovery or literature with this distant, strange, mysterious land across the Atlantic. And since his name was Amerigo, they called it America. That's the only reason that we know for that, of that particular circumstance. But of course, the greatest propagandist for a mysterious land in the Atlantic or across the Atlantic was Plato. And Plato, on the other hand, had such a prestige in the ancient world that clear into the Christian Middle Ages, he was very often referred to in literature or other elements of historical publicity as the divine Plato. And by which, of course, the ancients meant someone who is of such spiritual, intellectual attainment that they are outgrowing or have outgrowing the human race and are now join divinity. Because you kind of have to keep in mind that the ancient Greeks particularly, this wasn't quite as popular with the Romans, but with the ancient Greeks, it was generally believed that if people exercise their what nowadays we call consciousness in a truly powerful, heroic manner, and that's not such a silly statement, because the way this world is and always has been, to really think for yourself, often against the prevailing fashions of belief and of thought, requires courage. So you have to be heroic to think of something that nobody else has thought of before, or at least nobody recently. And so the first status after human to the Greeks was a hero. Then after the hero, the next step would be a demigod or a demigoddess, demi meaning half, so half god. In any event, someone who is now really reaching the transhuman status. And then, of course, after that, the gods and the goddesses. So it undoubtedly would have carried a great deal of prestige if somebody spoke of the divine Plato, I think in the Timaeus, but don't take my word for it with my geriatric memory. In the Timaeus mentions that there was for a long time a large landmass, like either a huge island or a sort of cluster of islands out west of Europe. And the way they usually stated that out beyond the what now we would call the Strait of Gibraltar, which they had, of course, their own particular name for it. So that there was a big land mass there, and that eventually, and with a very high culture and with all sorts of beautiful things, art and poetry and all the beautiful things that the Greeks liked, and that eventually, for some reason which I think never was very clearly specified by Plato, the god Poseidon, who is the god of the ocean, it's really the Greek, the Greek ocean god, became angry at the land of Poseidonis, and then made it sink, so that the whole of Poseidonis went down into what at a much later period we have referred to in English as Davy Jones' rocker. So it sank under the ocean. And so that legend of the sunken land of Poseidonis, or as it came to be called later on in history, Atlantis, because it sank into the Atlantic Ocean, became a very important legend. But let's say its historicity, its historical accuracy was never regarded very highly. It was understood that it was a typical Greek mythos, in this case designed by Plato, and that sort of thing was always very highly regarded. And as we tend to look at it in our talks dealing with myths here, we have reason to believe that most of the great myths of the world, beginning with the classical myths of Greece, have multi-layered meeting structure. And of course that annoys many contemporary students, because we are much more simple-minded. Or if you want to put it in other words, we are much more stupid in a lot of ways than the Greeks. The Greeks may not have computers and artificial intelligence, but they had plenty of non-artificial intelligence. And so that's important to remember. In any event, certainly the Greco-Roman cultures would have regarded anything from the pen of Plato as being of very great importance, and probably as being of great personal, spiritual significance. Now, what I mean by that is that, and you will undoubtedly find that if you are here, and I am extolling one or the other of the myths, whether of antiquity or of the Middle Ages, whether they are the Greek myths or the Roman myths, or for that matter the Hindu myths like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, that if we look at them with the proper interior view, with the proper consciousness, we can usually discover that they have several meanings simultaneously, and that at least one of these meanings is of a personal nature. So that, let's say, to just mention probably a better known myth, the Arthurian myth does not speak just about an ancient British king, but it speaks of the human spirit that comes to discover its own transcendental dimension and its connections with various other transcendental conditions. And these meanings don't exclude each other. This is the problem of much of our university scholarship, because the scholars discover evidence, and often very convincing evidence, for the interpretation of some particular myth or mythic cycle. And then they put it into their books that this is the meaning of the myth. But on the other hand, if they had maybe employed avenues of exploration of a more involved and more profound interior variety, they may have discovered other meanings of such myths. Once again, always remembering, and this is something that we might keep in mind for ourselves, that meaning, we all seek for meaning, obviously, and commendably, but there can be several meanings for one story, for one image, for one legend. And why is that so? Because there are several, how should we put it, several functional centers of consciousness inside of us. Not only one, but a whole bunch. And Madame Blavatsky named them 7. The Tibetans have 5. And in various other cultures have others. So you see there is, why is that? Because we are really smarter than we give credit to ourselves. We think that we are kind of, we discovered the meaning of this, somebody predicted that there would be a German guy with a little mustache who would kill a lot of people, and that his name would be Hitler. That's the meaning of a particular dream or of a particular legend, but that can be only one meaning. And so it's always good to keep our keep the windows and the doors of our interior castle, as some of the mystics called it, open, so that if there is more than one meaning, then we can discover that as well, and that enriches us more than just the one. In fact, this sort of one-sidedness, which it has been called, that still on the various guises prevails in our culture, is a very unfortunate thing, because what it involves is a limitation by ourselves of our consciousness, which, since I mentioned Hitler, I don't know why, but I mentioned him, he's an unforgettable guy with what he caused in the world. When we look at a particular figure of history as a mythic figure, then we need to discover that this mythological meaning of that person may have more than one dimension. There's more than one face. And the more we recognize that and turn our consciousness to exploring this circumstance, the more informed in various ways of our consciousness we will be. So undoubtedly, there, clear back in Plato's day, there were probably a lot of people who believed that Plato has picked up the old historical stories, and that undoubtedly Poseidonis or Atlantis was a real thing, and that it is worthy to be explored at that level. Right up to our days, I know of people was sort of amusing to me because of the way they carried on. This must have been, I think it must have been in the late 60s or thereabouts. There was a university lecturer from one of our universities here in California. And she was a sort of semi-amateur cultural anthropologist. And so she was going to find Atlantis, the sunken world. So she gathered all kinds of people and probably also all kinds of money. They bought 1 or 2 ships and off they sailed to Spain, where they figured that, just sort of outside of Gibraltar, in that portion of the Atlantic, there must be the remnants of Atlantis. Well, first of all, they ran into all kinds of disapproval from the authorities of the great Francisco Franco Bahamonde, who was the caudillo at that time. He said, we don't want all these foreigners coming here digging around in our ocean. Maybe they'll find something that we could use, and then they'll make off with it. You know, he was from Galicia, Franco, and Galicians are known in Spain as the most practical of all the different peoples who live in Spain, and also the ones who are the best businessmen. A wily Galician. You know, he's the only man who was able to, since I mentioned him before, Francisco Franco Bahamonde was the only man who was able to spend 2 days and nights with Adolf Hitler, with Hitler haranguing him about different projects that he wanted Franco to get in. And Franco sat there happily looking into the air and saying, no, 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 no. And so Spain never joined the Axis, even though some of the Axis powers, you know, Italy particularly, Italy, Germany, were helping Franco out during the Civil War. But Franco said, okay, that was all right because they were helping me, but that doesn't mean that I am going to help them now. And so nothing. He got back on the train, Hitler got back on the train, and he said that he would rather have several of his teeth pulled without anesthesia than to spend another day with Caudillo Francisco Franco Bahamonde. So, you know, tough guy from Galicia. So similarly, you know, he was not very favorable to this expedition. And he sent all kinds of officers and policemen after them. And when the Spaniards sort of recognized that, you know, these people are paddling around in the ocean, they're looking for things, they're not finding anything. So he said, you know, gentlemen and ladies, why don't you just go someplace else? Which, of course, did not please them very much. But finally, for a variety of reasons, probably mainly financial, they decided that they will go somewhere else, because obviously here they are regarded badly by the Spaniards, and they might be just expelled. So if they go somewhere else where they let them in, they will treat them at least better, and they might even find something. So can you imagine what they did? They took their, I don't know, was it only one ship or was it several? I think only one. So they got on their ship and they went from Spain to Ireland, to the Irish Sea. And I said, that's where we are going to find Atlantis. Somehow the grave contradiction between the geographical location of these two spots didn't seem to have bothered them. But of course, needless to say, they didn't find anything in Ireland either, just like they didn't find anything in Spain. All right. I don't think this is of very great interest to you at the present time, but that was one of the latest explorations of Atlantis that I know of, and for all I remember, it was pretty unsuccessful. However, somehow I probably should call it somehow the archetype of a mysterious land beyond the Atlantic Ocean. A land of mystery, a land of marvel, and a lot of strange cultures remained in the mind, in the unconscious, of a lot of people in Europe. And so when people were recounting ancient legends, when people were studying myths, the story of Atlantis, as largely as inspired by Plato, would come to the fore from time to time. But interestingly enough, no documented contact between the people of the European continent and the American continent really came about until Christopher Columbus. Why that has happened is anybody's guess. But for one thing, it was far away. The instruments of navigation, the ships, and the technology, as we would call it nowadays, were not very advanced, and the sailors were practically too afraid to go really very far with their ships. They figured that they are going to suffer a bad fate. So as we know, it didn't really happen until, well, how should we call it, the sort of the beginning of the high Renaissance in Europe, and its accompanying phenomena, that the first navigators took their courage and actually made the journey and eventually arrived in the New World. Now, if you look at the history books, you find several claimants for having discovered America. There is Eric the Red, who was a Scandinavian chieftain who supposedly landed in North America, but he didn't stay here very long. And various others, until eventually the Genovese navigator in the keep of the by then united Castile and Aragon, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella had, with his ships, made the journey and actually landed. Now the mystery complicates itself a little further, because for one thing, this was not being paid much attention initially, but eventually the ships of Columbus, each one had, they were sailing ships, obviously. It was long before steam or anything else was discovered. On their big sails, the Santa Maria and the others. Santa Maria is easier to remember, because it's the name of the Virgin Mary. The sails had a peculiar design of a big, dark, painted cross. And I don't have a blackboard here or anything to draw it on, but it was also discovered by the scholars that this cross, in turn, was one of the several emblematic crosses of an organization that by then had been suppressed rather cruelly, namely the Order of the Templars, or the Order of the Temple of Jerusalem. So here came the three big ships with the Templar cross, and researchers have not exactly proven, but I would say intimated, that perhaps the Genovese navigator Cristoforo Colombo was in fact a by then secret member of the Templar order, and that perhaps the journey to the New World also was maybe a slightly disguised Templar project. So there is a whole legendary there that involves the Templars and involves secret and mysterious plans and doings on the part of the discoverers of the American continent. Now there is the two great painters of the modern era are Pablo Picasso, and the other gentleman whose name I tend to forget, and that's why I'm looking for it in. Yes, Salvador Dali, who actually, in terms of his regard and the high honors that were bestowed on him by Spain and by the King of Spain, let's say, outpaced Pablo Picasso quite a bit. The king made him a marquis, a high degree of nobility, and he had his own castle and everything. But eventually, the castle caught fire, and Pablo Picasso died in the fire. People who like to put everything down to some black magic would have said, oh, there were the Aztec spirits or somebody like that who came over with their fiery power and burned down his house. Now, of course, all of that is pretty silly, but there is one, I really like him. He's a truly, in the modern era, truly mythic painting. And it's less, of course everybody has his own sense of judging these things, but it is more infused with what to me are spiritual realities than the paintings of Picasso. And inasmuch as I have such deep love for those people, whom I am just going to mention, obviously a communist like Picasso would not have been able to paint anything spiritual. And if he did, then just take it from me that he didn't. In any event, people who say that they are, they are materialists, they're followers of a particular philosophical form of materialism, that needs to be. But in any way, what was I saying? Just 1 minute here. Okay. In any event, there is a painting by the man whom I just mentioned, Salvador Dali. There's a painting by Dali which I believe is called La Conquista, and the Conquista is a large painting showing the ships of Columbus bobbing in the ocean with their big black crosses on them, and from the ships flying in the air in a most astonishing manner are a host of spirit beings. They are carrying banners and crosses and swords and lights, and they're flying And now, so this is, in other words, the conquista of the continent is preceded by the conquista on the parts of the spirits. Here they are coming. So, which also would indicate a conviction on the part of the painter that in these events, legendary and mysterious as they may appear and poetic, in these events there are some deeper undertones, that the physical events of the conquista or any other famous historical circumstance are only an outer shell of some interior mystery, and that therefore it was undoubtedly preordained and perhaps contrived by mysterious forces that the American continent should be discovered. Subsequent history, I would say, pretty much bears that out. But you have to have a sympathetic view of the situation in order to accept that. In any event, so it was even, and then of course came the various other nations, including the British, who began bringing more and more people over, and the great literary and philosophical figures like Sir Thomas More, who wrote about the New Atlantis and so forth. So the excitement of certain minds in the Western world became greatly stimulated by the discovery of this new continent, and in fairly short order, immigrations of various people to the New World occurred, initially primarily, at least in the North American sphere, from England, but certainly as Central and South America bespeaks certainly the Spanish immigration as well. Now, if we want to get very romantic about these things, and I have caught myself thinking and saying a few times in the course of my long and checkered career that you have to be, by temperament, a romantic to be an occultist. If you are a hard-headed pseudo-scientist or something of that sort, not to speak of a brainless Marxist, then you will give it other explanations. But in order to make a historically significant discovery, you have to have a feeling-toned attraction to your subject. You have to feel what you are doing. And this is true not only in the discovering continents, but in many other things. I am certain that if with some curious machinery that people nowadays have, we could check each and one of your past, and you wouldn't like that, you would go out the door. But let's say we would discover that in your own life and in your own career, certain of the more unusual and therefore perhaps more fascinating encounters and discoveries that you have made were preceded and accompanied by a profound excitement and feeling. A prosaic person hardly ever discovers anything valuable. But a romantic has already discovered the most valuable of them all, his own consciousness or her own consciousness. So these are important things to remember, because as in our own, in the 20th century and in our own century, we were taught, let us say, by people like Freud and Jung, that there is a vast, unexplored, multi-continental realities inside of us. There are many Americas. There are many North Poles. There are many strange and mysterious things. And I can, with my humble person and consciousness, even I can testify to it, that a great many of these are as real as anything as you find in the physical world, and most likely even more so. But you have to have enthusiasm. You know, enthusiasm, the feeling of enthusiasm, you know what enthusiasm means? It's being entheos, as the Greeks called it, to being filled with a God. When you are enthusiastic, the God has manifested. Without enthusiasm, and by the God I don't mean necessarily one of the old boys from Mount Olympus, but the God that may be hiding inside of you and that needed the right enticement to come forth, and it begins to manifest various other manifestations. But the enthusiasm, the devotion to what you are doing, the excitement are all important. You see, fortunately, we are beginning to rediscover that to some extent. Therefore, I would say it is not outside of the realm of possibilities, but I will not just associate myself as approving it 100%, that there was some underlying spiritual reality. There was something happening there, somewhat like what the painter had painted on the spirits of the Conquista, and subsequently also, that somehow this discovery and many of the subsequent historical events on this continent were meant to be. Now I know that especially since a number of years ago, with a very popular book called that had to do with the encounter of the American general and his troops and the Native Americans. Something at Wounded Knee. Yeah. So since Wounded Knee and some of that literature, there came about a romanticization and perhaps an excessive attention to the factor of what, and I'll say it again, what falsely are called the native peoples. You know why? Because there are no native peoples, except perhaps in a certain portion of Africa, because the anthropologists have discovered pretty much without any doubt that all of humanity started from that, I think it's West Africa, one West African province, and from there they marched all over the world and populated the various continents. So the people who populated the continents were not natives of the continents which they populated. They were probably if you believe the Bushmen, for instance, who have very wonderful legends and so forth, if you believe the Bushmen, then probably humankind did not originate anywhere on this earth. That will please the saucer people, you may be sure of that. But whatever the case may be, yes, there are people who came, heaven knows from where. Maybe they came from the heavens. Maybe they came on some of those, what do they call them now, these funny things that are flying around now? Drones, yeah. So, maybe they came on the prehistoric drones, or whatever the case may be. But in any event, the issue is that, yes, they went to various places, and then they considered themselves, well, of course, they came to places that were empty except for some animals. This is now our land. And now we tend to believe that they are native peoples. No, they are not any more native peoples than we are. But some of them have had a longer residency status in some continents than others. And if that is admitted intelligently, then maybe we can explore matters even a little bit further. But in any event, these enthusiasms that have been around, and I don't have all that much time left anymore, these enthusiasms need to be put into certain perspectives. Because if we claim to make contributions to cultural anthropological science, then we should be honest about it, as honest as humanly possible. Now then, I would say that if there is, and there has been a revival, in fact, much of it is being revived by a Russian philosopher whose name again this moment I forget. Alexander
Gurdjieff?
No. It's a contemporary. But he is quite interested in Gurdjieff himself. Alexander Dugin, you got it, I know. So Alexander Dugin has written quite a bit about the possible involvement of the secret Templar order after the Templar order was forbidden in the 1300s, and how various historical events came to be involved with secret Templars, and that probably one of them was the Admiral of the Seven Seas, Christopher Columbus. Now, the very beginning of the discovery of America is sort of surrounded by a mystery, a mysterious aura. Sometimes this, sometimes that, sometimes Templars, sometimes somebody else. But in any event, it is quite possible, owing to the fact that the Templars had their own navy, so a lot of Templar knights were trained navigators, and when they were forbidden to function, they didn't give their ships back to the Pope, and they went to sailing with them. And that undoubtedly something of that sort may indeed be much closer to historical truth than to any other theory. But I need to bring this back in conclusion to the whole continuing of the mystery of the new Atlantis, let's say, the best way to translate. It is without a doubt that America, both North and South America, but probably North America a little bit more, had some sort of an occult background, had been nourishing occult forces, which in turn attracted people of an inclination in that particular direction, and that so beginning before even the foundation of the American Republic, there was an esoteric aspect, an esoteric core to the settlements of people from Europe on the American continent, especially in North America. And that as time went on, these unfolded into various directions. There is a great deal of evidence indicating that, well, beginning with the Salem witches. What do you think those poor women, most of them, were, that aroused the ire of the Puritan preachers to hang them on trees in various ways, execute them, calling them witches? Because they had occult powers. Listen, where I come from Hungary, in the Hungarian countryside, in every little village had at least one or two old ladies that were reputed to have occult powers. And you know what? Some of them actually did. And others just had the reputation. But in this field, you know, to be a witch or a sorcerer or a magician, something like that, if you have the reputation, then you already made it. You know, look at the reputation that poor old Edward Alistair Crowley received. Much is built on a reputation. And then when, let's say, these initial influences that came from the folk magic of Ireland and Scotland and Wales and Cornwall and places like that, when these were had come out of their hiding and were beginning to spread to a certain extent, then they were reinforced in the 18th century by what? By the bearers of the esoteric tradition in Europe. And so there is a tremendous amount of evidence indicating that by the time of what people, in my mind, wrongfully call the American Revolution, because it was not a revolution, it was a war of independence. That's two different things. Karl Marx did not travel to the United States with the Pilgrims. Neither did Friedrich Engels or any of the other rascals. But anyway, it now began to spread. And so people came to the New World who were emissaries of esoteric traditions and their organizations in various parts of Europe. And if you want to read about that, there is a wonderful material on that particular subject, but also on many related subjects in Mr. Manly Hall's book, The Secret Destiny of America. And we got a few copies last time they brought them over, and this is the one, but only one little portion of it I'm going to mention to you. And what we are dealing with now is that at the time, and just prior to the so-called American Revolution, the freedom fight, emissaries of occult orders, of magical, mystical associations from Europe. My guess would be primarily from German Rosicrucianism, but also for some others, came to America and began to cultivate what we might call esoteric America. Now, one little paragraph I will read here to you, if you bear with me. Mr. Hall writes, in the journal The Theosophist, Madras, October 1883, the editor, most likely H.P. Blavatsky, commented on an article, Adepts and Politics. She writes, and here he quotes, it was an unsigned editorial in that journal, but pretty certain it came from Blavatsky. Yet it is as certain, although this conviction is merely a personal one, that several brothers of the Rosy Cross, or Rosicrucians so-called, did take a prominent part in the American struggle for independence, as much as the French Revolution during the whole of the past century. We have documents to that effect, and the proofs of it are in our possession. Now, that's a big statement to make. I have tried to incite some of my friends who go to India go to India and find those particular that particular issue of the Theosophist and the manuscripts there too. But in any event, it is our firm conviction based on historical evidence and direct interference from many of the memoirs of those days that they were due to primarily to one adept. And then she goes on writing some about Comte de Saint-Germain, but in any event, let's say, if we consider H.P. Blavatsky's testimony to be authentic, and the adherence of many signal, honest and truthful people who followed these directions from H.P. Blavatsky, then I think we can recognize that indeed some of these better informed and more insightful people, it's including H.P. Blavatsky herself, knew of the secret and yet very real connection of the founders of the American Republic with the occult traditions of Europe. And if at some point when we wish I could tell you more about it, because this particular, Mr. Manly Hall was very fond of this particular discovery. And I made him discuss it with me a couple of times, so I remember quite a bit about it. And let us say once again, the things that are strange, that are unbelievable, sometimes are the ones that are true. The ones that are very believable are false. Why is that so? Because what we are concerned with, folks, what we are concerned with right here is something that in ordinary logic, in ordinary conviction, in ordinary science does not exist. It exists in another reality. You will have had to have gained entry into that other reality in order to receive some of it, to carry it forward, and to do something with it in a tradition. The common, the ordinary, the everyday reality is a lie. It is the lie of all lies. No wonder it breeds so many liars, especially in politics. But let us say it's a lie in the sense that it is an untruth. It doesn't mean that it is totally untrue, but it means that there are significant portions of it missing, which renders the entire extroverted image of reality suspect. Now, I know that these things are very difficult to deal with with our logical mind and so forth, but if you think over it a little bit, you will see that they are quite interesting. And I know I don't think all of it is mentioned. This is an excellent book, by the way, of Mr. Hoeller, The Secret Destiny of America. But let's say there are elements that maybe should have gone into this book that didn't. And they had to do primarily with Mr. Hall's acquisition of a couple of journals, one going clear back to the 18th century, and the other one being the Theosophist, which he quotes here, which testify to the connection of the founders of the American Republic and the European esoteric tradition. And Mr. Hall told others too, but he told me how he acquired some of that information, and all of it is very interesting. But I'm afraid that after all, we still have another Friday this month, and we can go to it further. But let's say, Manly Hall was one of those rare scholars who had a fantastic scholarly memory, and at the same time an utter and indefatigable truthfulness. So anything that he has experienced, things that he has found, things that he has copied and translated in his books, right there, I think should have a very high esteem by us. So let us say, all I was able to do tonight to indicate that there are previously unknown, frequently secret undercurrents in the history of the United States itself, and that these undercurrents contain a powerful and insightful and ultimately, I think, very important undertone of esotericism and of the occult. If we are still, and if I am still alive a week from now, we'll look into it somewhat further. But these things are very important, and the ones that at least I have heard or read, I can really testify to them. Thus have I heard, and thus I know now, and I do believe that when some places become holy ground because of the great spirits of the other world working with it, then the United States is one of them. Another and important reason to believe and to exclaim, God bless America, and thank Providence for having brought us here, at least those of us whom it has brought. Thank you very much.